Yo, Nakama, how is it going? It is your boy Cozy coming at you with another episode here of The Cardboard Cafe. And today we're going to be kind of revisiting slash reimagining one of the previous topics that we've talked about. A couple episodes ago, we talked about like why players don't improve, right? And just as a quick little recap, it's a couple of different factors that come into play. But this time, we're going to flip the script. We're going to look at the other side of that coin and kind of touch on a topic similar to that. Now, everyone at one point or another has said, that deck is busted, or I would have won if I played this list instead of what I already run. That player only won because he's playing the meta. But you also kind of look at it from a player's perspective. That same person you're complaining about is constantly topping the local meta. They are the same players that you hear 2 or 3 times a week winning a locals. These are the same people that show up week after week and claim that top spot. So now we're going to kind of dive into the topic and ask the question, right, of what actually makes a great TCG player. So sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and let's talk some cardboard. I hope you guys have that cup of coffee or that tea, soda, water, whatever it is you're drinking. I hope you have that in hand because we're going to be sitting here and just talking about a couple things. The first one I want to tackle is the biggest myth in card games, and that is the deck plays itself. Now, don't get me wrong. Meta decks are strong. They are really, really good. They're very hyper consistent. They do very well performance-wise. All of that makes sense. And it takes a very good list to make that deck work the most optimally that it can. And of course, deck building absolutely matters. If you guys have not checked out the deck building video, go ahead and take a look at the beginner's guide over on the YouTube channel, just that way you guys kind of understand like why deck building matters and what makes a great deck. But a great deck still loses if it's piloted poorly. If you don't take the time to learn the deck, like we talked about in episode 2, I believe, of Cardboard Cafe, you're not going to do well. And a weaker deck can still win through better play. And we've all seen someone borrow a tournament winning list and immediately lose with it because they don't have the experience. Or someone takes a random rogue deck and just absolutely decimates the meta, which is what I have been doing lately over in my local scene, playing a whole bunch of random things and still ended up topping. I think over the last few locals that I've done, I have played Red Ace, Black Yamato, which are relatively kind of in the meta / strong in the meta, not really meta decks. But I played Roger. Red, purple, Roger into my local, still went X1, finished in the top 6 top cut. But I digress. What it basically means is the deck doesn't necessarily play itself. The deck is what gives you an opportunity to play well, right? But ultimately, the player converts those opportunities into major wins. And I just wanted to brush up on that really quick, saying, oh, this deck is super brain dead. You can just play it and do whatever. No, the deck gives you an opportunity to play very, very well. But the player itself is what matters in a lot of these meta decks because it gives you the opportunity to be successful, which transfers into our second kind of point into what makes a great TCG player is technical play. Now, some examples of great technical play is proper sequencing, correct dawn usage, proper timing effects, knowing what attack order to do, playing around blockers and potential counter in hand, swinging before playing characters in some instances, and understanding what could be a trigger and what triggers out the opponent to snag a win or survive the turn or whatever the case is. So essentially what I mean by strong technical play as well is when a player notices a small mistake, they capitalize on it the best way that they can and maximizing their chance for success. Think of it just like any competitive game. I'm going to use League of Legends as my primary one because I love League, play it all the time, blah. But ultimately, you lose your 1v1s a lot of times due to small mistakes. And a great player that's in The Apex tiers, so Master, Grandmaster, Challenger, they capitalize on those small mistakes and give them an advantage later on in the game or immediately right then and there to continue a snowball effect. Translating that back into TCG favors in One Piece, it could be my opponent misused their Dawn on an attack. I'm able to counter out and push for lethal next turn. Or they, like in Magic, if they play a spell and I don't counter spell it right then and there, they use that advantage to maximize the potential of that card being great later on in the game, or using the effect right then and there to continue a snowball effect of where they gain advantage either through tempo, through card effects, whatever the case is. I should have counterspelled at that moment to stop that from happening, and now I'm at a point where I can't use a counterspell. Same thing with like Riftbound. If I don't use the kind of the events that you can do during a battle for conquest over a specific like territory, battlefield. If I don't use that particular one, like On Guard or Defiance, things like that, to buff up my attack power to kind of get over that, they could just take over that battlefield, gain a ton of advantage. I lose a ton of tempo when one small mistake that I made would have changed the difference. So what makes a great TCG player is understanding when to use certain card effects, kind of peeling it back to One Piece just to kind of give it more relevance, right? Is using a leader effect way too early and telegraphing the play. That gives their opponent so much information on what they are going to be kind of leaning into towards for a line. Same thing with like Magic. If we use an effect too early and kind of telegraph the play and give unwanted information or giving the opponent too much to know, that's what's really going to drive them behind. And that's what's going to really show a strong player versus an average or even a weak player. Another example from One Piece is like resting too much Dawn and burning through all of their resources too early. And again, just giving more information. Playing characters before attacking could be subject to some certain triggers that nullify the attacks and or nullify the effect of a character and KO it. So there's a whole bunch of different options that a great player kind of runs through in their mind before they start making plays. Now, a great player wastes very few actions. They use every card with a specific purpose in mind, and they use their resources with a specific reason in mind, whether it's mana in Magic, it is ink in Lorcana, Dawn in One Piece, resources in Gundam, whatever the resource that you use to play your card game, if you're using it with a specific purpose and using it with the right reasons, you are on the fast track to being a great TCG player, which does segment into resource management as another key factor when it comes to the One Piece card game or any TCG in general that uses resources as a part of its game mechanics. Like example, Yu-Gi-Oh does not use resources. So instead of using resources generally as I'm going to play cards, using the resources that come from the monster effects or the spell and trap card effects that they have in their deck would fit more into this as well. So reality resources don't just mean the things that I use to tap to play things. That could also include things like the number of cards in hand your opponent has, the actual resources on the board if you have those, characters or monsters in play, tempo on the board, your leader abilities or your commander effects in Magic, cards remaining in the deck, and most importantly, things that we touched on in the last part, information. So sometimes taking damage is the right course of action if you want to get cards in hand, if you want to see what your opponent is kind of thinking and kind of poking for information. In a lot of cases, sometimes defending is wrong, where we block a small body, but then they play a big body to give it rush, to swing big that we could have used that free block for and just gave up one card in hand. Now we got to give up our whole hand to defend out of the swing. Whatever the case is, right? Sometimes defending is wrong. Sometimes taking the damage is wrong or right. It does not matter. Sometimes spending 2 cards to save a character loses the game ultimately as well because you're trying to defend one body, but now you don't have the counter to defend yourself. Whatever the case is, every decision does cost something in your match. Now you kind of got to do a risk management in your mind of, is it worth giving up this to save this, or to do this in lieu of another line of play. So great players will always ask the question of, what resource am I spending here? Whether it's actual resources on the board, cards in hand, information to your opponent, whatever the case is, what am I spending to try and get an outcome for that's favorable to us? Of course, this one is probably my favorite because I do this all the time, is reading your opponent. Now, most players think, okay, it's my turn. Top players will think about our game, topics such as like what dawn counts, what is the hand size of me versus my opponent, what's the tempo on board, what attacks can I do in a certain order to get the most favorable outcome for me, right? Looking at One Piece as an example, if we're looking at our hand and it comes to, okay, he has 4 cards in hand. The most likely outcome is I'm going to assume they're all 2K. So he has 8K encounter. So, and he has 1 life. So I'm assuming it's going to be 5 2K. So he has 10K in power. So if I have 4 characters on board, how can I evenly divide my Dawn to maximize getting 2 cards out of his hand each swing? Because that would be the dream, right? If he's a 5K leader, swing 9. That guarantees 2 cards. Well, technically 3 cards, unless he has like the event or whatever the case is, Dawn up. All that matters, right? But if we're looking at, he has 4 cards in hand, assuming they're all 2Ks. I have 3 or 4 swings. How can I divide my Dawn up to get at least 2 cards out of the first 2 swings, forcing him to take the last life and going for lethal? So that's something that you kind of want to look at. Also, playing to your opponent's bluffs. A lot of times, card game players will bluff or feint that they don't have counter, or that they do have a ton of counter when they really don't. It's very similar to like playing poker or whatever the case is that you're playing, where you have to show potentially false information. And that really plays with your opponent's mental, because now you're showing confidence that you have a dominant game state when you might not. Or you're feigning that you have very poor game, like a very poor game state in your hand, when really you have all 2Ks in your hand. So they're going to be trying to poke you for 6. You're giving up 2Ks left and right, and they've already committed to their Dawn in a certain way where it's just like, now I'm in a bad spot and I can't really do anything. But the biggest thing is recognizing those patterns from your opponent that a lot of great TCG players and a lot of card game players, whether it's TCGs, poker, etc., they will read the pattern and they will read the opponent more so, if not the same, as what they're looking at on the game state. Because they could have even tempo, they could have even board presence. But if you're reading your opponent, you can kind of gauge more information off of that and then determine, okay, am I clearing out his board this turn, or am I going to push for a lethal spot in the next 2 or 3 turns? So now you got to ask yourself, like, why didn't they attack? Why are they leaving Dawn active? Why did they search that specific card? And sometimes your opponent will throw in like a little quip that could be wrong, of like, oh, this is the only thing I could pick, yada, yada, yada. Or, ooh, I big whiffed and this is the only thing I could grab, and it's like a 1K or a 2K. Like, kind of got to ask yourself, okay, why did they pick that? And why did they verbally say, oh, this is the only thing I could pick? And then lastly, of course, looking at planning ahead. Average players will look at, what do I do this turn? Whereas a great player is going to be looking at, okay, what can I develop in the next 3 to 4 plus turns? What is my line of play in terms of building up my board progression to being where we ideally want to be? So we're going to be talking about what to do on the next turn. What's an opponent's response to what we just played? And what are we doing the next turn? So we're going to be either setting up for lethal, we're going to be managing down their hand size, we're going to be keeping certain answers available in case they do play something that we can counter, leaving Dawn up intentionally, even without the thought of using it for anything, just leaving it there intentionally to really throw off your opponent and make them start thinking of potential lines of play that don't even really exist. And they start outthinking themselves and throwing them off of their initial game plan. And of course, just don't overcommit when you don't have the way to kind of back up that commit, and then you put yourself in a corner. So sometimes the strongest play doesn't necessarily lead to being the strongest board. It's forcing your opponent into awkward decisions that kind of ease your gameplay and your line of play going forward. Lastly, I want to talk about what makes a great TCG player of being able to know when you need to take risks. So every game has moments when you have to choose either the safe play or doing a high risk play and just hoping for a high roll. But you need to really start thinking and considering, when are you behind, when you are ahead, to make these decisions. What's the tournament situation looking like? Is this the finals? Is this the first round? What is your opponent matchup? Of course, looking at clock management during the round as well. How much time do I have left in the round to really kind of plan out, if we're in overtime, what can I do within the next 2 turns for me to really push forward, or the next couple of minutes, to see how I can gain an advantage and ultimately win my match. Don't be a filthy yellow player and play double Borsellino with 10 seconds left so you can gain 2 life. Do not do that. That's bad. No. But of course, swinging into life hoping for a trigger, not the best decision. Taking a hit instead of countering could also be a good decision, but it could also be a very poor decision based upon where you're kind of at in terms of the tournament. Going all in for lethal could be very beneficial. What I like to do if I'm doing like an all in type of play, instead of swinging evens, I may just dump a whole bunch to kind of bait them to either use all the counter in their hand to defend themselves, and then just swing enough to kind of counteract how many cards they have in hand or whatever the case is. But it's very dependent. I prefer the going even, like swinging like 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, because that's a guaranteed win at that point. But if I'm just being cheeky and I know I have it in the bag, I'll dump a whole bunch into one swing, force them to counter out, and then I'll swing a little baby swing to get the win just to be cheeky. But that's just me. That's kind of if I'm playing, a little bit more toxic or whatever the case is. And then understanding odds before even taking the risk, right? It's, what is the likelihood of me hitting a trigger? What are the likelihood of me getting this blocker out of the way? What is the likelihood of them countering out? Those are the things that great players consider before making the decision to swing. So, as a recap, being a great player isn't about owning the expensive cards or copying tournament deck lists and being a net decker or playing the newest leaders because they have some broken effects due to power creep. It's about mastering technical play, resource management, reading your opponent, planning ahead, and then calculated risk taking. But I do want to know from you guys, what skill do you think separates great players from everyone else? Is it a sequencing issue, matchup knowledge, reading your opponents, something completely different that we didn't talk about today? Let me know down in the comments, because I'd love to hear your guys' take and talk a little bit more about it down there. If you guys are enjoying this type of content where we're just sitting, talking, and just going over cardboard related stuff, let me know by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, ringing that notification bell, and don't forget to join our Discord over at the Cult of Cozy so we can continue our conversations outside of the videos, and we get to talk about decks, all kinds of other things. And if you are wanting to support the Cozy Games channel, I do have my merch store linked down in the description below. But ultimately, I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. I enjoyed talking cardboard with you guys, and I'll catch you guys in the next upload. Peace and love, Nakama.
Thanks for riding with the vibe. Cozy Games every time. Pulling leaders, making plays on the line. Sailing through the grand line, strategy refined.